Alright, let's begin. So we're going to look at solving equations and specifically looking at equations with fractions. So we're just going to get further practice with those kinds of equations. Alright, so we'll just skip by that. But let's take a look at this. So let's determine the common denominator of the following fractions. So we have 3 over 4 and 2 over 5. So what do we need to do? Well, remember, one way to get a common denominator is if you just take the two numbers, you could just multiply them together, and you can get a common denominator equal to 20. So CD for common denominator. And that's from 4 times 5. There are other ways as well, but that will work for our purposes. And let's multiply. So 20 times 3 over 4, that's going to be 60 over 4. And you'll see when you do 60 divided by 4, that gives you 15. So you get a whole number. Let's do 20 times 2 over 5. Well, if you do 20 times 20 times 2, that's 40 over 5. And 40 divided by 5 is equal to 8. And so in both cases, by multiplying by the common denominator, we end up with a whole number answer for the multiplication. And that's going to be key as we go on to these equations. Okay, so what are we going to do? So as we solve these equations, we want to multiply the entire equation by a common denominator to eliminate the fractions. So what do we mean by that? Okay, let's take a look at the first equation. So in the first equation, you have 3 and 3. So your common denominator in that case, well, they're just the same. So you can just choose 3. Now we want to multiply the full equation. So I'm just going to rewrite the equation, x over 3. And let's multiply that by 3. And that's going to be equal to 5 over 3. But we're also multiplying that by 3. Okay. And let's multiply that in. So you'll have 3x over 3 equal to 3 times 5 is 15 over 3. And let's do the calculations for both the left and the right side. So on the left side, 3 divided by 3, well, that's just x. Or sorry, I should have said the left side there. On the right side, 15 divided by 3, well, that's just 5. And so you get x equal to 5. All right, next we have x over 2 minus 1 over 5 is equal to 0. In this case, we have two denominators, but they're different. So let's find a common denominator. In this case, 2 times 5 will give you 10, so you can use 10 as a common denominator. All right, and now let's multiply the equation by 10. If we're multiplying an equation, we need to multiply all the parts. So I'll write out the parts, just the initial parts. And then let's indicate the multiplication. So you have 10 times x over 2, so I'm just using brackets for multiplication here. And well, technically speaking, you'd also have 10 times 0 on the right-hand side. Okay, so everything's multiplied by 10. So let's go ahead and compute that. So you have 10x over 2 minus 10 times 1, which is just 10, over 5 equals 10 times 0, which is, well, still just 0. So that didn't do anything on the right-hand side. Okay, 10x over 2, well, 10 divided by 2 is just 5x minus, well, 10 divided by 5 is just 2 equal to 0. So we've eliminated our fractions. That's our goal when we multiply by the common denominator. And so now we can solve it like a regular equation. So minus 2, plop that over to the other side by adding it. And then the 5 in front of x, well, since that's multiplying, since it's 5 times x, to move it over, you divide by 5. And so then you have x is equal to 2 over 5. And there you have it. That's your final answer. So in both cases, what you can see is the fraction are eliminated. So I'll say fractions are eliminated. Okay, let's take a look at some further examples. One thing I'm going to note is when you're multiplying an equation by the common denominator, what I was doing in those examples, I was just multiplying it through and then dividing it out. But what you can do, you can simply divide it first by the denominator. And we'll see how that works in this upcoming example. And you can keep your numbers a lot smaller that way. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. So you have 3, 2. So what's the common denominator for that? Well, we can use a common denominator of 6. So both 3 and 2 will divide it into 6. Okay, so that's what we want to multiply the equation by. So I'm just going to write down our parts, and then we can indicate multiplication afterwards. Okay, so multiplying by 6, just going to do that in brackets. All right. For each of the parts, instead of doing like 6 times 7 divided by 3, we can, first of all, just take a look at these two. Take a look at the number on the outside with the denominator on the inside of the brackets. So 6 divided by 3, well, that's just 2. 6 divided by 2, well, that's just 3. And so what we can do, by looking at that, we can actually simplify this to 2 times 7x equals to 3 times 3x minus, well, 6 times 5. We can just leave that as is. And that way we don't have to get some big fraction with like big numbers involved, which can sometimes be tricky to figure out how to reduce. Here it just, you instantly do that division and you have smaller numbers and just some simple multiplication steps now. So 2 times 7, that'll give you 14x. On the right side, 3 times 3, that gives you 9x. And then 6 times 5 is 30. All right. And now if we have an equation where you have x's in multiple areas, that's where we want to move all of the x's to one side. So what you can do is we have a 9x here on the right-hand side. Let's move that to the left-hand side. Right now 9x is positive, so we need to do the opposite operation. So we need to subtract it. And so you'll have something like 14x minus 9x is equal to negative 30. So the minus sign in front of the 30, that stays. All right, 14x minus 9x, well, they're like terms. They're both x's. So we can just subtract the coefficients. So 14 minus 9 is just 5. So you have 5x is equal to negative 30. All right, and then move the 5 in front of the x over by dividing it. And you're going to get x is equal to negative 30 over 5, which is just equal to negative 6. And there is your solution. So x is equal to negative 6 in this case. And the key again is the number that you're multiplying, that common denominator, you can right away divide that before you actually multiply it by the number in the top of the numerator. All right, so before you actually watch the solution or go through it, try it out yourself first. Okay, but I'll just go through it right now. So there's a couple of ways to approach this. The way I'm going to approach it is, let's just start the same way we've done all the other problems. Let's find a common denominator. So we have 3 and 4. So a common denominator between those, 3 and 4, well, 3 times 4 is going to give us 12. So 12 will work as a common denominator. So let's multiply our equation by 12. So I'll just rewrite everything. And let's multiply by 12. Okay. And as I do that, you'll see for the 12 on the left side here, I only actually need to multiply it by the 2/3 part, which may seem a little different from the other ones where it seemed like I was multiplying each and every single part. But the difference in this one is that all of this is already one multiplication statement. And so because that's one full multiplication statement, we just need to multiply our number 12 by that one statement. Whereas before, the parts were always separated. You didn't have one single multiplication statement. You had multiple. So in that sense, if you have brackets like this, you just have to multiply by the number in front of the brackets. Okay, and let's do what we did last time. So let's take that number, 12. Let's multiply it by or divide it by what's in the denominator. So you can have 12 divided by 3, which is going to give you 4. And on the other side, you have 12 divided by 4, which will just give you the opposite, 3 there. Okay, so with that number, we now turn that into multiplication. So 4 times 2 times x minus 4. And on the right-hand side, well, now we have a 3, and there's still a 3 left over. Okay, let's simplify things here on the left-hand side. You have 8, because 4 times 2 is 8. X minus 4 equals to 3 times 3, which is 9. All right, so we're actually getting pretty close. However, in this case, we do just have to now look into the brackets. So the brackets, if we ever have a problem with the brackets, we can always use the distributive property. And what was the distributive property? Well, that's where you multiplied the number, let's say the 8, by the individual parts inside the brackets. So 8 times x and 8 times 4. And they would be subtracted because of the subtraction sign in the brackets. And that's all equal to 9. All right, and let's just simplify that. So 8 times 4 is 32. And we now want to move things around. So we want to get x by itself, so let's move the 32 over. So right now it's subtract 32, so let's turn it into plus 32. 9 plus 32 is going to give you 41. And then the 8. So the 8's multiplying. So as we move it over, divide by 8. And you can just leave your answer as a fraction. So 41 divided by 8, or 41 over 8, is the solution. And in this case, that fraction can't be reduced, so you can just leave it there. All right, so that's a look at solving some equations with fractions, solving them by multiplying by that common denominator.